Right. Episode 28 right here on the Double G Sports Radio Network. Nick Durst, joined, of course, by Joe Calabrese. And Joe, the weather is just been crazy in the tri-state with the tropical storm and a lot of power outages, and a lot of games are affected. I know the Yankees, they just did a rain cancellation before even the day started, and they're going to be playing for the first time a doubleheader of 7 innings. How do you feel about that rule for this season?
I mean, we were talking about this on previous podcasts about all the rule changes and stuff, and to be perfectly honest, the 7 inning is a little odd to me. I understand the circumstances, though, because you have to understand that these teams are not playing while they're in quarantine or while they're waiting those positive test results to come back. So if we're delaying when they're playing, what are we going to do? We're going to have them forfeit games. The Players Association probably wouldn't go for that. So, I mean, yes, it's very softball-y, right, with the whole 7-inning thing, and it is what it is. Again, this entire 2-month stretch is going to be the most off, the oddest baseball, the wackiest rules we've ever seen, and that's just because of the circumstances going on.
Yeah, speaking of wacky, the wackiest thing happened over the weekend, which was Yoenis Cespedes goes missing, and he was at the hotel. I don't know how they don't see him leaving, and then apparently he's at the mall the next day. He opts out of the season. Joe, it's summertime, the sun's out, it's shining bright, and you got to go to shopvalerio.com, check out the sunglasses they have there, and of course, before you know it, it's going to be daylight savings, which is terrible. It'll get dark, so you got to make sure you have your watches and you can change the clocks. And, of course, they have watches there as well. So go on over to shopvalerio.com and use the promo code, all caps, Nick.D, 25 at checkout for 25% off your order.
And we want to thank our other sponsor for today, Ganache.com. They are one of the best quality mobile accessory companies I've used, along with low, convenient prices. My must is their tempered glass protector. I drop my phone all the time. Usually I drop it face down consistently, and their glass protectors are must-have and luckily have saved me throughout all types of tough drops. I highly recommend to check them out.
There's lots to digest here, so we need to bring in a baseball expert, and he is Dan Federico. Of course, Dan, verified on Twitter, rightfully so, writes about the Yankees for Bronx to Bushville, does athletics communications for CMSV Athletics, used to write for a number of websites, including Bleacher Report, and we are happy to bring him on the show, reuniting here myself with Dan, who I've been on his wrestling podcast a few times a while back. Dan, first and foremost, how you doing? And secondly, when Twitter and all the verified accounts got taken over, how did that impact you?
What's going on, Nick and Joe? I appreciate you guys having me on. I was a little depressed during that couple of hours span, but you know what? I made it through. I'm happy. I'm back to tweeting again, so everything's good.
All right, so let's talk a little baseball here. So far, what do you think has been the wildest story to come out of this season?
I think we have to, say with the Marlins, and I guess we could tie the Cardinals in with that as well. Just the fact that, I know it's rumors at this point, but that they were out, at clubs or whatever was going on, the fact that they had a spread like that within a team is pretty scary, especially because, how that could affect the rest of baseball. We've seen so many schedule changes and cancellations, and, the Yankees played the Phillies last night, and the Phillies haven't played in a week. Then they had to step in and play Garrett Cole. So, I mean, it's been pretty crazy. I think that's the biggest story, but just in general that they're playing right now in a non-bubble situation. And, besides those two situations between the Cardinals and Marlins, everything has been, I guess, as well as it could be going. So, but between the Marlins and Cardinals, those are definitely the two biggest stories so far.
Yeah, that was crazy. And who knows? I mean, we could see even more outbreaks. And I do really think, going into the season, it was hanging on a thread. And I think now it's even more on a thread. The thread's getting super, super thin. And, Joe, you think that the season is going to finish?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing their absolute best possible. Again, we don't know how many teams are going to have a player contract the virus and need to be in quarantine for these 2 months, right? That's totally unknown. With the Marlins, we saw the worst case scenario, right, where it affected enough of that clubhouse where they were truly in danger of not being able to put together a team to eventually put on the field again, right? So that's kind of the extreme. But we're on the downturn of what happened with them. The Cardinals.
Yeah, the
The
Cardinals,
reports
I mean,
say that
it's
they were at,
crazy.
we don't know for sure. But the Phillies, that ended up working out in the end because those results were a false positive, and yes, they had to miss games. But again, that's the best case scenario. They didn't have to do any of that. I think they'll be able to get through it because, again, so long as they can manage a situation where maybe one or two teams are affected at any given time, I think everybody else should be good to play. In that scenario, you would have what we had over the past weekend where 6 teams didn't end up playing because their games were postponed, right? But I think that was the threshold, the absolute worst case scenario for right now. I do think that they'll get through the season. I'm very optimistic.
Dan, how do you feel about the 7-inning doubleheader rule being implemented now? And how do you feel about the fact that if you go to an 8th inning, it's automatically already starting with the runner on second base? I think that's a little too much there for me as a baseball fan of my life. I don't like the 10th inning runner on second as is. And not having it in the 8th inning in a doubleheader that's only 7 innings, that's just too much for me.
Yeah, so I mean, I obviously understand the situation where they want to keep the games as short as possible and doing this. I'm not a fan of it. I'm not as upset about it in an extra inning game, but I feel like at least for the 7-inning doubleheaders, at least let them get to 9. And then if you want to do it in the 10th inning, put the runner on second if need be, then do it. But, I'm hoping it's something that's just this year because of the circumstances. But with the new CBA and all this stuff coming up, it definitely could be a talking point going forward. And this could be something implemented, which that would be definitely something I don't want to see. But if we're talking 1 year, I'll deal with it as of this year, but definitely not a fan.
So it looks like the DH is here to stay. So, Dan, what is Cespedes doing? I mean, he needed this year, needed to have a good year in order to probably get a good contract, and he's opting out of the season. If he's really opting out for COVID-19 concerns, that's fine. But it seems like it was more so an issue with the Mets and him, with his at-bats and whatnot, and not playing the field. And this is a guy who he would have really benefited from the DH in the NL moving forward. And he's kind of just like, all right, I'll just, not play this year. What do you think the market would be like for him next year? I don't see him getting anything more than a minor league deal. I mean, you look at Yasiel Puig, he can't even get a deal this year. And he had the deal with the Braves, but they voided that for coronavirus. So I think the market's going to be really tough for Cespedes when he's coming off these injuries, and he only played 6 games.
Yeah, so first and foremost with the Mets and Cespedes in general, I was actually really high on their offense. We know Jacob deGrom's the best pitcher in baseball, I would say. So, you have that there. Pitching staff is deep even without Noah Syndergaard. But I really thought Yoenis Cespedes would benefit from being the primary DH. I mean, we know the Mets have a couple people who they could rotate in that spot. But I really thought, like I said, Yoenis would benefit from that. The situation is just how it went down was so Mets, and I hate to say that because when the Mets traded for Cespedes and then signed him, I mean, everybody felt that magic that he brought to the team. There's no doubt about that. So I was excited to see if he was going to be able to at least bring some of that back in the short season where anything could happen. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of surprises once we get close to the postseason. So I was anticipating something fun out of Queens, but it always ends up being something with him. I mean, Cespedes, every stop he's had, there's been issues on the field, off the field. Like you said, Yasiel Puig's a good comp. I don't see him getting anything more than a minor league deal if he even gets that. Because, he's had those injury issues. Again, the personal stuff off the field has also gone against his favor. So if he gets a minor league deal, he'll be lucky. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone takes a flyer on him. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if he's also in a situation where he doesn't have any team that wants to sign him next offseason.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. And, Joe, me and you've discussed this before, but Cespedes is a top 3 trade deadline acquisition of all time with CC Sabathia and Carlos Beltran. Because what he did in 2015 was so ridiculous. He got him to the playoffs. Murphy got him to the World Series. They should have won the World Series. Unfortunately, they didn't. But, how are you going to look back on Cespedes' tenure with the Mets?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We know CC was MVP caliber when the Brewers got him in 2008, and Cespedes was really the catalyst, along with Daniel Murphy, on that Mets team that rode to the World Series in 2015. So it's funny you mentioned the trade deadline. That's a good segue for the point that I wanted to make. So we have to stay in this real world right now with Cespedes, right? He's only played 127 games, I think, in the last, 4 seasons since 2017. That's not really a lot. That's less than one full season over the course of the last 4 years, right? So there are a lot of questions about his durability, right? But we saw that glimpse, right, in the first few games with his bat, that power. He absolutely still has the power, right? So we have to look at this in a practical way. To me personally, I don't think a big market team or a team with money is going to want to deal with everything that comes with him. But I do think that some of the smaller market teams, the Royals, the Pirates, the Rays, so on and so forth, right? A couple of other teams you could throw in there. I think because of the way they operate their teams, it's going to be a situation where Cespedes has to say in his mind, okay, I'm not going to get a big offer, right? I'm going to have to take whatever I can get. I think a small team is going to try to scoop him up. And if they succeed next year and if they're good, so be it. They'll ride out the season with Cespedes. It's probably only going to be a one-year deal. But if they're not in it line, right, and this is obviously pending we have a season next year, I think he would be another possible guy who's going to get moved at the trade deadline, because that seems what he is at this point. He seems like he's the guy who moves to the contender to try to put the contender over the top, right? So that's what I think is going to happen. I think there's too much extra baggage now over the past couple of years for any team to deal with that. But I could be wrong. But on this podcast, I'm right. Me and Nick are usually right. So we'll see how that plays out.
Dan, any obviously we're really close to the trade deadline already. So any word on anybody who's interested in Robinson Cano? Maybe the Mets can get rid of him because he's actually off to a good 10-game start here. And we know his contract's horrendous, but I don't think there's anybody interested in his contract. But overall, are there any teams right now that are really you're hearing are looking to sell? And who do you expect to see potentially get moved here? I know going into this abbreviated season, everyone was saying, Francisco Lindor might get traded, but that's not going to happen because the Indians, especially with the expanded postseason, are likely to make the playoffs. So do you think there's going to be a lot of trades this month at all, or is everyone going to really basically stand pat and play out the last month of the season?
Well, it's funny you mentioned, the Lindor situation, because I think that's going to be throughout baseball where a lot of teams are just going to feel like they can compete, and rightfully so because the expanded playoffs. So I do think a lot of teams are going to stand pat. I can't see any major moves, especially when you factor in, these players, I should say, are going through these certain quarantine protocols where I know that all the teams are going through it, but you're expecting someone to get traded from the Mets to the Angels, then you got to move cross country. I'm sure there may be some sort of not an unwritten rule, but I just can't see some of these big players, moving across the country or doing a move like that where they have to do certain things. They have to, get a new apartment and do these different things in different cities. So I feel like personally it's going to be quiet. Haven't heard anything in terms of rumors as of yet. One interesting I did hear that, I don't know if it was public knowledge, but I was talking with somebody in baseball yesterday actually, and it was just that, there's a lot of the talk of you can only trade for the people in the 60-man player pool, which is true, but you could always do trades for really anybody you want and just list them as a player to be named later. So that's something that I think I'm going to keep an eye on when it comes to these trades where you see a lot of players to be named later or things of that nature. So that's something that I'm interested in. But in terms of trades, I don't know. Just gut feeling is I don't think there's going to be much happening on that front.
So you just mentioned stuff that might inhibit what usually is a lot of activity. It probably won't be as much activity, right? So a lot of things are going on in the world. We're still under really, really extreme circumstances. So I want to ask you a personal question, right? So you've written former places where Bleacher Report, Elite Sports, right? You've written about the Yankees